Homegrown carrots are the last word in crisp, crunchy satisfaction. There's an incredible range of fantastic varieties to try, many of them only available to the home grower. I mean, have you ever seen a purple carrot in the grocery store? These ravishing roots are easy to grow, so long as you're in the know on the essential steps to success, which is exactly what I will be sharing today. It's time for our Carrot Growing Masterclass. Variety is the spice of life, and carrots have it by the taproot full. Now, we all know orange carrots, but did you know there were red, yellow, white, even purple carrots, my personal favourite? This rainbow of roots can really pretty up the plate while adding a touch of novelty to the kitchen. Just look at them, gorgeous! Roots range in size from stump-rooted, which are great for containers and shallower soils. Then you've got conically shaped chantenay types, which are good for rocky or clayey soils. Your standard roots, which are good all-rounders. And the granddaddy of all, the imperator carrots, which can reach sizes of 10 inches or 25 centimetres long or more. Carrots are also divided into early types and main crop types. My tactic is to sow a few sowings of early carrots in the spring. These will produce really tender, extra sweet roots, which you just can't find in the shops. Absolute bliss. Then from midsummer, I will switch to sowing a main crop for big, chunky roots to enjoy from autumn onwards. Search seed company catalogues and websites to see what tickles your fancy, or seek out an award winner such as these for reliability and solid performance. Carrots are best sown direct where they are to grow, as they don't really transplant that well. You sometimes see little sort of plug trays of carrots for sale, but I'd advise against those. They are unlikely to really thrive, and if you work out the cost per carrot, it's quite eye-watering. Now, for best results, we want a sunny position like here, and we want a nice, smooth, crumbly soil for those nice, long, deep roots, free of any kind of stones, for example. Recently manured soil, or soil that's very rich, can cause roots to fork or become multiple-legged, and you get those really funny comedy-shaped roots. I get my fair share of those, to be honest, but it doesn't really bother me because, of course, it's still really good eating. It's early spring here, so do you know what? It's time to make my very first sowing using an early variety that will better cope with this cooler time of year. Now, you can make the first sowings of carrots up to a month before your last frost date, or 2 weeks earlier than that if you're sowing in a greenhouse, a tunnel, or say under a cloche. Now, this soil here had plenty of crumbly garden compost added in the autumn, and now it is nice and crumbly and looking really beautiful. You could eat your dinner off this stuff. I'm making quite shallow rows, about a ½ inch or just under a centimetre deep, and I'm spacing the rows about, well, kind of 8 to 10 inches or 20 to 25 centimetres apart. As you can see, the seeds are really quite tiny, so we need to sow them with care because ideally we want the seeds spaced about ½ inch or a centimetre apart. Now, if you find them quite tricky to handle, you do have a few options. The first is just to take a pot of sand, pop your seeds in and then mix it all up, and then sow little pinches of this seed sand mix. This way the seeds should naturally land a bit further spaced apart. Another thing I like about this seed sand mix is that it makes it very clear to see where you've already sown. But if you don't fancy that, there are other options. Pelleted seed, or these, which are seed tapes. Tapes with the seed nice and evenly spaced along the tape already. You can see them there just about. Now, this is just biodegradable and will rot away, and all you have to do is lay it out in the bottom of your trench like that, and then just snap off when you're done, and then simply cover them over. I prefer to use just normal seed because it's an awful lot cheaper, and with a little concentration and care, you really can space the seeds quite reasonably far apart. It can always come back and thin any excess anyhow. carrots can be slow to germinate. They can take up to 3 weeks, especially early on in the season like it is now, so please do be patient. People often complain of patchy results, but here is perhaps my biggest tip. You need to keep the seeds consistently moist until the seedlings appear. That may mean watering every day in warmer weather, but the results will be worth it. If a seed has germinated and then is left to dry out, it might fail, so consistent moisture will ensure smoother germination. In hotter weather, I like to make life a little bit easier for myself by covering the soil to keep it cool, shaded, and the soil moisture more consistent. Now, the easiest way to do that is just to cover the rows with wooden planks like this, or you could use, say, burlap or hessian. Check underneath the plank every day, and as soon as you see the seedlings beginning to push through, remove it. Carrots are a cool season crop that really don't like it too hot. Nevertheless, it's still a little bit on the fresh side here, so I'm just going to cover the sown area with this glass window pane here, just to keep things a bit snug until they sprout. Now, if you're in a really hot climate, then you may find that sowing in the summer is impractical because they do like it on the cooler side, in which case you'll probably find it's best to sow them from autumn right through to early spring in the cooler months. And to keep your crop coming, I would suggest making a fresh sowing maybe every 3 to 4 weeks, ending with a main crop variety to store over the winter. I said earlier that carrots don't transplant well, but if you do need to start them off away from growing areas, perhaps somewhere cooler in the heat of summer, then there is one option. You can sow them into cardboard toilet paper tubes like these here. Just fill them with any all-purpose potting mix and then simply sow 1 or 2 seeds, up to 3 maybe, into each tube, and then lightly cover them over. Now, once these come up, you can grow them on a bit and then plant them into their final spacings, complete with the cardboard tube. There's no need to remove that. Unless you've got a very steady hand at sowing time or use seed tapes, you are likely to have to thin the seedlings out once they appear. Now, I like to do this in stages, initially to about 1 inch or 3 centimetres apart, and then a few weeks later to something like 2 to 3 inches or 5 to 7 centimetres apart. This way, each root has enough space to swell to its full potential. Do not waste those little thinnings though. Some of them, especially the later ones, are really rather elegant looking and can be used in salads. When you thin the carrots, you have a good chance of releasing that lovely carroty scent, but caution is needed because you may well attract the carrot's #1 nemesis, the carrot fly. Now, they reach their peak in summer, but I exercise caution even in the spring because carrot fly can detect carrots from up to half a mile away, which, you have to hand it to them, is really rather impressive. Then once they hone in on your crop, they will soon burrow into the roots, creating a right mess as they go. No one likes ravaged roots. Keep your carrots under the radar by thinning them on a still day so the wind doesn't waft the carroty scent far and wide, and try and thin them at dusk when the flies are less active. Avoid bruising the foliage because that will release the carroty aroma as well, and water along the row once you are done to knock back the scent. Even better, thin seedlings when it's actually raining because flies don't like to be around when it's wet. Some gardeners just like to snip the seedlings off at ground level, so that's another option for you. The other option you have is just to keep the crop covered at all times with a row cover of something like a garden fleece or an insect mesh. Just take the time to lay it properly and thoroughly secure the edges so that the flies can't get in at ground level because they are low flying. If you don't like the look of covers, then you could also try growing your carrots between members of the allium family, like, say, garlic or onions. The oniony scent and different shaped foliage should help to confuse the carrot fly. You could also try, of course, one of the many carrot fly resistant varieties available, though do bear in mind none of those will be 100% resistant. While carrot flies usually come in from elsewhere, there is a chance that they will settle where they get their teeth into your crops and then overwinter in the soil. So to avoid that, it's worth growing carrots in new areas of soil each year as part of a crop rotation system. Now, I can barely remember what I grew where when last year, let alone what I had for breakfast this morning. So a simple way to take care of that is to use the garden planner. The garden planner has a really clever crop rotation system so that when you try to place a crop where it grew in recent years, it will flash red to warn you about that. If you'd like to look at the garden planner or even enjoy a completely free trial, I will pop a link to it in the description below. Be diligent with your weeding and keep the seedlings well watered in dry weather. As carrots establish though, they will need less water from you, and in fact, watering less often should encourage the roots to grow down nice and deep, making them surprisingly drought tolerant. That said, if it is dry for a prolonged period, do give them a really thorough, deep soaking so that the water travels down and doesn't just wet the surface. Carrots normally flower in their second year. Of course, we don't often see that because carrots are usually harvested long before that point. That said, if it's very hot and dry, it can encourage carrots to flower prematurely or bolt. Bolted carrots have really gnarly, tough roots which are kind of inedible. The flip side of that is that the flowers are absolutely stunning, mesmerizing in fact, and they will attract a lot of beneficial bugs which may well go on to help control pests elsewhere in the garden. For this very reason, I sometimes allow a few plants to overwinter and flower the following summer. They're just so beautiful. And if the variety you are growing is a standard open pollinated variety, you could even save yourself some of the seeds that they produce. Carrots are great in containers. Use a deep enough pot for the roots to grow or choose a stump-rooted variety. Now this little lot was sown right at the end of winter into old potting mix with a little bit of sand added, and then I simply popped over a glass pane to create a kind of slightly warmer microclimate to help them germinate. Anyway, they're coming along really nicely now, as you can see, and I don't think there's any need to thin them out because they are at about the right spacing. Now, container carrots are completely reliant on you, so you will need to water them more often than in-ground carrots. So give them a good soaking, as you don't want it to completely dry out. As well as enabling a super early start, growing carrots in containers means you can raise them up out of the danger of low-flying carrot fly. That means about waist height. And I reckon the beautiful, frothy, ferny foliage once it gets going looks just stunning. Knowing when to harvest your carrots can be a little bit of a guessing game, especially for first-time growers. But there are a few telltale signs. The first thing to look out for is lots of really lush foliage. That's usually an indicator of a good-sized root beneath. Sometimes you can see the shoulders of the roots just pushing proud of the soil to gauge the size. But if in doubt, I like to just brush away the soil around the root to expose the shoulders of it so I can see how big the root is. Harvest the biggest roots first, leaving the remainder to grow on. Now, it's easier to harvest from moister soil, but another little tip is to push down on the root before twisting it and then pulling it up. That way it tends to come away a lot easier. If you do find that roots are snapping, however, use a fork to loosen the soil around the roots first before lifting. Once they are up, twist off the foliage, otherwise it will continue to draw moisture away from the roots, which will turn them soft and spongy. And it's for this reason I can never work out why posh carrots are often sold with the leaves still intact. It just makes no sense. That said, do not waste the carrot tops. If they're in good condition, you can cook with those too, perhaps whizzing them up into a carrot top pesto to slather over the roasted roots. That sounds rather good actually. Early or salad varieties of carrots are best enjoyed before they get too big, when they will be at their most sweetest. I also like to enjoy them as soon as possible after harvesting, because fresher carrots are also the sweetest. And it's for this reason that it really is worth growing them yourself. You can't get that freshness in the stores. I of course wash my roots after harvesting them, but I never peel my carrots, as a lot of the vitamin content is in the skins. You can also freeze your carrots. Just cut them into rounds and then blanch them in boiling water for a couple of minutes to lock in that flavour and colour and freshness. And then pat them dry and then pop them in the freezer. Main crop carrots are bigger, chunkier affairs that makes them well suited to lasting through the winter. In my slightly milder, temperate climate, I just leave the carrots where they are for most of the winter to lift up as needed. I can always cover them over with leaves or straw to help insulate the ground from the worst of the frosts. In colder climates, however, it's best to lift up all of your roots in the autumn before the ground freezes solid for the winter. Just brush off loosely any soil, then store them in boxes of either damp sand or old potting mix. Then keep them out of the reach of vermin in a cool, dark place such as a frost-free outbuilding. There's more on storing root vegetables in this video, so why not head there next? And if you have a favourite variety or tip for growing carrots, then why not share that down below? I'll catch you next time.